I'd now like to invite Bashir Jiwani, who is the head of Fraser Ethics, to come up. He has a few words for us, and then we will get you set up for the afternoon's adventure. Bashir.
Well, the time I'm going to take is to do a couple of things. The first thing that I need to do very quickly is to dispel any idea or sense that I was anything but an incidental part of this conference. I think it's really important to know, and I say this with such great pride, that the annual Fraser Health Ethics Conference is a function of the strong and growing ethics community and the diversity community at Fraser Health, which has tentacles in many, many different places, and people who come in and out of the community and people who actually have a more stronger role. So I just want to name that, and I want to start actually by naming that what happens is that every year we work with the leadership to figure out what is it that we want to talk about for the next annual conference, and then we assemble a steering committee who really guides the thinking behind the conference and what we want to achieve and how we want to do it. And so if you don't mind, I'm going to embarrass a few people, but I will just quickly ask you to stand up if you're here. These are the members of the steering committee for this year. Dr. John Hamilton. John's actually not here today. Jacqueline Purr. Josh Myers. Please stand wherever you are. Don't make me point. And there you go. Thank you, Jacqueline. Josh, I saw somewhere. Michelle Lane, Tracy Irwin, Lori Leith, she's not here. Terry Brock. And then, so these are the folks on the steering committee for this year's conference. So please give them a warm welcome and thank you. I want to just acknowledge again that this is a significant investment, the conference, because there's a lot of people's time that goes into it. So I want to name that Michael and the senior leadership and the commitment of the organization to the ethics conference, but also things like, with this year the way we worked it is, as you know, we asked every executive director to take the time and build the participant group who we want to come and participate in the meeting and to benefit hopefully from what we would offer. And so the executive directors in the organization were completely committed to this and moved this forward. Obviously, we need to thank the incredible faculty that we have, Gabor, John, Brooke, Catherine, Gabby, Colleen, folks from Instant Theatre who you have yet to experience, but a bunch of people who are all obviously the content experts for today's conference. I want to just let you know that the facilitators at this conference are a key part of the day and have been for many years. They're all graduates of the intensive bioethics program that we have at Fraser Health. It's a 5-month course in case you're interested. And they come out every year and they make themselves vulnerable and they offer their skills with humility and courage to try to get through some very hard conversations in some short spaces of time. And you know that each of you have met at least one of those folks, but they're a crucial part of the conference. So I want to extend my very deep and sincere thanks to each one of you. So please give them another round of applause as well. And I will also take this opportunity, since I'm doing this, to say thank you to my team, to our team, to Fraser Health's Ethics Services and Diversity Services team, who is really the driving force of everything that happens here. We have the benefit today outside of Ashley McDonald and Jennifer Carpenter, who are helping with the desks. We have our I would say, core members of our team. Catherine Duthie is here, Emily Carpenter. We have our clinical ethicist, Maria Michael, Mustafa Ahmed from our Diversity Services Department. I want to mention someone who's not here anymore, Duncan Steele. Duncan was our systems level ethicist, and he just went on to greener pastures more recently. Well, we'll see if they were really greener. And we're still kind of mad at him, but that's okay. He was a very important player in the development of our conferences generally, and even in this one as well. So I just want to acknowledge Duncan in absentia. And then, you know, my heroes for this conference, the two people whose shoulders are incredibly broad and who have worked incredibly hard to make all of this happen, Alan Alvarez and Susan Rink. I don't know if Susan's in the room, but Alan and Susan, thank you immensely for your work. Okay, so now what I want to do is transition into the workshops a little bit. So there's two things I'd like to do in this section. The first is that I want to, oh, bless you, Alan. The first is that, hero to the rescue to the end. The first is that I want to say that, just name explicitly what's already been pointed to, alluded to, and that is that we recognize that serving the needs of the populations we're talking about, the kinds of vulnerable people we encounter and try to care for, is not something that any individual, professional, or team can do. It requires partnership with people and teams that we're not used to, not always in easy partnership with. And that's what we're hoping is happening at the tables. And part of what we're hoping that you're going to leave with today is the identification of a shared understanding of what really matters as we collaborate across different teams, and then methods or strategies for how we might actually build on, achieve those things that are important in the way that we work together. So that's a concrete outcome that I think we're aiming for at the end of this day, and that I hope the facilitators at the table will help guide us towards. So I invite you to make sure that that's top of mind, and let's check in a little bit later to see how effective we've been at doing that. Okay, now what I want to do is link then the stuff that we've been hearing to the concurrent session. So in the concurrent sessions, what's going to happen is that the facilitators are going to guide you through a conversation using the tools that we have at Ethics Services for Fraser Health to try to actually make headway. So what we want to do then, so our goal at Ethics Services is to be genuinely useful, to really help with, in very concrete ways, individuals and teams to work through hard situations. That's what we're trying to do. We don't want to have, ethics is not just about having lovely airy-fairy talk and then not having it impact action. We want to come to action. And so I want to sort of say, what does that link look like? How do we actually do that? And I want to say that one of the blessings, by the way, of getting to work in this area is that we have these tools and these ways of being practical, we hope, but every year we get exposed to wonderful thinkers and wonderful leaders, and that continue to help us evolve our own thinking at Fraser Health in the way we do ethics. And so, thank you very much, Alan. And so I'm just naming that this is the way we're thinking about it, but I would imagine it'll shape further based on the kind of thinking that we've done so far. So I'm just going to now switch to that. So what I want to say, I was going to tell you to do a case study. I'm not going to do a case study. So some of you will know, but I'd like to just share it for everyone. So the way we understand ethics at Fraser Health is as a journey towards living with integrity. The idea is that all of us are on this journey to being whole. That's what we're all trying to do, is be whole. That's the understanding we're operating with. And as such, all of us are somewhere on this spectrum. The extent to which we understand what matters in our lives and that it shows up in our lives is the extent to which we're on the right side of the spectrum, where we have a clear sense of what life is about, and that is showing up in our lives. When it's the case that we don't really understand what matters to us in life, or it's not showing up in our lives, either because we don't have the courage to do what it takes to do that, or because external forces don't allow that to happen, is the extent that we're on the right side of the spectrum. And in that situation, we're kind of disintegrating. We're falling apart. So let me give you a sense of this. So the first thing that I want to say then is that what is integrity? How do we define integrity? Integrity is when what matters to us, in a sense what our talk is, shows up in our lives, shows up in our walk. That life actually it demonstrates the meaning that we have for it, what matters to us, what's at stake. When those things align, then each of us is integrated, we're whole. When those things don't align, then we start to fall apart, like on the right side of the spectrum, to the point where if I just showed you a picture on the right side of the spectrum, you might know it's a person, but you wouldn't know what that person looks like in any way. They're actually not clear. So we're all on this spectrum somewhere. And why does integrity matter? And I'll come back to this in a moment. Why does integrity matter? Well, integrity matters because it's directly tied to our well-being. It actually matters for multiple reasons, but one reason is that it's directly tied to our state of well-being. And the story that's obvious, that we all know about, but I'll just tell it, is so what's important to me? And one of the things that's important to me in my life is, and I've told the story before, is my son and our relationship. So what makes me happy, what's significant in my life, one of the most important things is my relationship with my son. So now imagine that, and I love nothing more than hanging out with him, and I want him to be well and us to be together, and that's what makes my life meaningful. Sunday morning, going for a bike ride. It's a beautiful day, and we're talking and we're riding. How am I going to be feeling? I can tell you, I'm going to be feeling fabulous, content, satisfied, peaceful, maybe even blissful. Like I'll feel really, really good. Now imagine that we're on this bike ride, and out of the blue, with no knowledge of mine, it doesn't make any sense, not congruent in the world, imagine that there's a truck I see heading straight for Rafiq on his bike, and I can't do a damn thing about it, and I'm convinced that he's going to hit my son. How am I going to feel? Petrified, scared out of my mind. My state of well-being will be completely compromised because what matters to me, I believe, is in serious jeopardy if, in fact, I haven't already lost it. So integrity is deeply tied to our well-being in the moment, in overall, our peace of mind. And ethics is actually the journey towards that level of well-being. It's the journey towards being whole. And to get there, from my perspective, is about, it requires some things. It requires the skills of critical thinking and the skills of being able to work productively with other people. So ethics at Fraser Health is about integrity, and integrity requires critical thinking and what we call pluralism. Now, there's one thing that I just want to point to here. One of the challenges I think we're talking about today, we're trying to figure out what our talk should be. I'll say more about that in a second. But what's also going on is we're identifying that there are some folks with whom we have to work for whom I think there's been such a degree of loss in terms of what matters in life, what makes life meaningful, and for whom sometimes the skills, the support, the love has not been there to actually help them to move in the direction of integrity. And resulting in behaviors that make it very challenging to actually support. And part of our question that we're asking is, how do we deal with that? I think that's partly what's going on for me anyway today. Okay, so what I'm saying then is that the approach you're going to practice and the overall approach, why we're having these conversations, is because we're worried about integrity, and integrity requires critical thinking and pluralism. So what's critical thinking got to do with it? Well, because the idea of understanding our talk so we can walk it, it requires the skills of understanding two types of things. In fact, what I want to say is every conversation from our perspective that we have has actually three dimensions. There's a conversation about what matters, there's a conversation about what the world actually looks like, and there's a conversation about what's going on in our heart. That's happening all the time when we're connecting from our perspective. And what I want to do is just say a quick thing about each of these three conversations, and then I'm going to tie a couple of them together, and then I'll point to the afternoon workshop, and then we will move on from there. Okay, so first conversation is a conversation about what's important. So some of you have already seen this. Let's just see. What's important to this dad?
Look what I drew for you, Dad.
Oh, hey, that's awesome. Cat.
It's a dinosaur, Dad.
Oh, wow, awesome dinosaur, buddy. Touchdown.
What's important to Dad? Well, his son is important to some extent. He was willing to do the ocular gymnastics to actually see his son. But obviously, the enjoyment of the game was also very important to him. The point I want to make here is that no matter whether we're trying to do it or not, it's intentional or not, every time we act, we are showing the world what matters to us. We are showing the world what we value by what we do, right? And ethics is about saying, okay, there's stuff that seems to matter, that may internally matter, but what should matter? And how do we actually make sense of that? I'll come back to this in a moment. The second line of conversation is the conversation about what the world looks like. What are the facts in the situation? What does this guy think is true about the world?
Again, this is the USS Montana requesting that you immediately divert your course 15 degrees to the north to avoid a collision. Over.
Please divert your course 15 degrees to the south to avoid collision.
This is Captain Hancock. You will divert your course. Over.
Negative, Captain. I'm not moving anything. Change your course. Over.
Son, this is the USS Montana, the second largest vessel in the North Atlantic Fleet. You will change course 15 degrees north, or I will be forced to take measures to ensure the safety of this ship. Over.
This is a lighthouse, mate. It's your call. Hello, Captain?
The point here is that no matter how well-intentioned we are or how hard we work, if we understand the facts wrong, we can't make good choices. We're going to be prevented from that. So let me just tie these two things up together for a moment. One of the things that we're interested in and what we're trying to struggle with, and it's come up in the conversation when we're working with folks, is personal responsibility. We think that it's important to hold people accountable for choices that are reasonably within their control. And yet, we also think that compassion is really important, right? So we want to make sure that we are supporting those who are hurting, who are suffering in some ways. Well, the values conversation is to say, what's more important? We're trying to figure out, how do we understand these things, and how do we actually prioritize them? But we also need to know, well, what are the facts around them, right? If I want to hold you personally accountable for something that's really within your control, I need to understand, as our speakers have been saying, what really is within your control and what isn't, right? So just noting the relationship between the facts and the values. The third piece I want to point to then is the third conversation, which is the conversation about what's going on in our hearts. And I just want to I'm going to show you the link. So how is this girl feeling, and why is she feeling this way?
Like if I'm not pretty, and people don't accept me for who I am, the way I dress, then it'll make me feel bad, but it will just give me more reason to pay attention in school, because I won't have anybody to talk to the whole time.
How is she feeling? What word would you use to describe what's in her heart, in her body at this time in this story? She's lonely. She's sorry? She's feeling judged, unvalued, pardon me, dejected, sad, painful kinds of feelings, right? So the link I'm making, so I don't know if I made this explicitly, the first thing I want to say then is that, well, it's not the first thing. I've said lots of stuff. It's just these words that come out. The link I want to make is that our feelings, what's going on in our bodies, our state of well-being, is directly tied to the extent that what we think matters in life is showing up in our lives. She's feeling these painful things because things that matter to her, she's not getting. What does she want? What is she valuing in this story? What does she want? Friends, companionship. She wants to be loved. She wants to belong. She wants to be accepted. These things matter to her. And in her view, she's not getting them. And it's resulting in this pain that she's experiencing, right? And what's her understanding of the world? How do you get acceptance and be loved? By looking a certain way. And does she look that way? No. So the fact of the matter is, this is the standard you need to meet aesthetically to be accepted. She doesn't, from her understanding of the facts, match that standard. That's why she's not getting what she wants. She's not getting what's important to her, and it's resulting in this pain in her heart. So that's kind of what the overall sense that we're trying to, the logic that we're trying to create to help us to think through these things. So in our situation with respect to values, there's some things that have come up already. We've said personal responsibility, I can't read that, compassion. I've also heard effectiveness in our conversation, that we want to invest in ways of engaging with people that we actually believe are going to achieve the outcomes that we want. We're also worried about social utility, and what I mean by that is we've only got a limited amount of resource, and we have to ask, where do we invest that time and energy? Do we put it in people who are actually going to make significant health gains as a result of what we're going to do, or do we invest it in people who may require much more resource and yet make lesser or fewer health gains? I'm just naming that these are the tensions that we're trying to figure out in our work every day. And part of the work of ethics is to say, okay, let's be clear about what was at stake, and how do we then prioritize this stuff? And then again, I want to name the relationship between values and facts. That only when something is important do the facts about it become relevant. So by virtue of the fact that we're talking about whether someone is personally responsible for their behavior or not, the choices they make about seeking drugs or whatever it is, suggests to us that personal responsibility is important. But I should say, put it this way, how does the value of personal responsibility rate against simply supporting someone who is suffering, regardless of the cause of that suffering? Whether I brought it upon myself or whether fate brought me to this door, if I am hurting, is it more important for you to stand beside me and go through that pain with me and help me find a way through it? Or is it more important for you to say to me, no, I need to first know whether you were responsible or not, and then depending on that, I'm going to help? I don't mean to make light of it in that way, but that's kind of what we have to ask ourselves. And there are other things that are legitimately at stake in the conversation as well. So that's the kind of thinking that we want to do. So what I'm going to do from here is simply do two more slides. So our approach then to providing support from an ethics, in a systems way from ethics services, is in difficult situations to try to enable teams to have hard conversations, usually in short spaces of time, using systematic methods that explore things like what matters and what the facts around these things are, in spaces where, that are inclusive of different perspectives, even if they're difficult to hear or understand, in respectful, inclusive, and emotionally intelligent ways. That's what we're trying to do with the approach that you're going to experience in the afternoon. So what your facilitators have, as you'll see already on the wall, is a process. It's a systematic way of thinking through a case. It looks linear, but it's not. You'll jump from thing to thing. But it's a systematic method of analyzing a case. What's key is that you're not going to get through the whole thing today. What we want to illustrate, what our facilitators are going to help us illustrate, is how do we start thinking about the facts together so we arrive at a shared and clear understanding of what actually is going on. And that's really what we're going to do. So what should matter and what are the facts? And then how do we actually reflect on the way we're having the conversation? Who's going to have all the voice? Who gets to talk? How are we going to argue with each other when we disagree with each other? That's what we're going to practice attending to in the conversation. So it's a humble part of a broader process that you're going to have the pleasure of practicing, and again, that your facilitators will guide you through. And it's really hard work, so be kind to them. They're lovely people. So that's what I wanted to share. With that, Catherine, I think I'll pass it over to you. Thank you.